Well, now Ruger is on the chopping block and could be the subject of a new potential ban. Today I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on, who's coming after them, and what I think Ruger's response will actually be. Almost a defiant response, I think, as opposed to what Glock's response was, which is kind of a similar case, but I think the outcome may be wildly different. Today I'm going to fill you in on exactly which gun Ruger is under fire for, and what I think the response will be and why I think the response will be that, but also what are the implications, because this isn't some kind of just benign attack from a no-name gun control organization. This is a very well-known organization, and I think what they're trying to do here is play a game that they've typically won, but going up against Ruger, at least looking at their previous responses, may not be the battle this gun control group is kind of ready for. So I'll fill you in, and of course I want to hear your opinion. What do you think Ruger's response will be to this situation? Do you think they follow through, or do you think they kind of give them the big old finger and say, we're not changing nothing? Let me know down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So on November 3rd of this year, Everytown sent a strongly worded letter to Ruger basically demanding that they pull the RXM from their lineup. Essentially, what they're claiming is that these RXMs, which you'll remember I did a review on one, they essentially are a Glock clone, but they have some pretty unique features that make them different from Glock as well. So it's a Ruger and Magpul collaboration. In Everytown's words, right, they've seen videos online where the RXM can be easily converted like Glock's to full autos. Now they actually point to Glock's response, which was to essentially end its legacy lineup altogether and come out with a new V model that will be released here very shortly, or at least we'll get a first look at it. So in short, do what we say, or you're going to end up like Glock and be facing lawsuits and bans from places like Chicago, California, etc. What's interesting here is that Everytown is preemptively saying that you may face litigation because it's inevitable that your RXM pistol is going to show up on crime scenes, even though there's no evidence right now of that at all. The other interesting thing is the ATF's reporting saying that these illegally converted pistols have dramatically increased. So their numbers say from 2019 to 2023, they've seen a 784% increase. When you see that on the surface, you're like, whoa, this is becoming a big problem. Keep in mind, this is roughly like 1% basically of all crime guns that were traced. And even by the own ATF's admission, just because you trace a gun doesn't mean it was used in a crime. So keep this in mind. You may have somebody in their home, minding their business, doing something that unfortunately I think the cat's out of the bag, to be totally honest with you, because of 3D printers, but you may have somebody that does that. And they're like, oh, let me see if this thing works. Boom, they put it on a gun. It's found. There was a separate charge against this person. That gun was then found. Let's just use that as a loose example, but we know that that does happen. So again, it doesn't mean that just because somebody put one of these switches on their guns that they actually used it in some kind of crime. They could have simply just been a hobbyist that were, doing something and ended up getting caught because of another charge potentially, right? So not to say these things aren't ever used in crimes, but if you've ever seen any of these videos, none of which I can show here on YouTube, by the way, but if you've ever seen them, you know that the accuracy goes way down, and most of the time when you see people using these things, it's in some of the worst gun control cities, or the most restrictive gun control cities in the United States. Honestly, it's such a small percentage, and they're making such a huge deal about it because they know that Glock is on their heels right now, and they think that Ruger will bend to that same pressure. But will they? Here's Ruger's response just in the past couple of years. In 2018 and in 2022, they faced shareholder and activist pressure saying, hey, y'all need to come up with sort of like a human assessment program to see how your guns negatively impact, or what kind of role your guns have when it comes to gun violence. You know what Ruger's response was? Hey, we don't condone violence, and we don't condone the misuse of firearms. But when firearms leave our possession and somebody illegally misuses them, that's out of our control. So essentially Ruger's response, and I'm not a spokesperson for Ruger, but I find it kind of interesting because activist pressure is one thing. Facing litigation is another, but when you have shareholders that are putting pressure on you, that would be probably the best chance for Ruger to fold under some kind of pressure. And even then, they said, hey, look, what we do is within the bounds of the law completely. They've been doing it a long time, by the way, too. And what people do with our products, once they're out of our control, that has nothing to do with us. That's on law enforcement. Remember, Ruger faced backlash in the late 80s, early 90s, because their owner, Bill Ruger at the time, said, hey, no citizen, something like this, no citizen needs over 10 rounds in their guns. Remember, they wouldn't even sell so-called high-capacity magazines until Bill Ruger actually passed away. They would only sell them to law enforcement. But in more recent years, they've gone toe-to-toe with gun control activists and essentially said, we are not responsible for the actions of very few. All right? And that, in a nutshell, they have consistently, over the past at least 10 years, that has been their position. Now, what makes this different, too, is that the RXM, as far as I know, is not sold in California. It's not sold in Maryland. So they already, I don't have a stake in this game, really. They're not used in law enforcement. Primarily, basically, they only have the civilian market in almost every single other state. So they already know what their role is. They know the battles they're willing to fight and the ones that they're not willing to fight. And unfortunately, Californians a lot of them don't get a chance to experience how great these firearms actually are. But it's such a legal nightmare, I'm sure. In order to get on that approved roster of handguns in California, they're just like, dude, it's not worth it for us. Now, here's why you should care about this. I think a lot of gun owners will care about this, but just to add more context to it, think about it like this. Everytown is saying the burden of proof is on Ruger, yet the only proof they're bringing to the table is Glock's response and videos, not real crime statistics, videos. So Ruger's response here could be crucial. I think Glock's response initially, I thought what they were doing is decent. They're like, hey, if you are going to threaten us, we'll change the design. Hopefully they make that design better. Here's where Ruger and Glock are different, though. You had one company fold to the pressure. That doesn't mean that Glock hates gun owners, right, all of a sudden, or they're, pro-gun control. Maybe this forces them into a better design overall, right? We'll just have to wait and see. But if you have another company that folds to the pressure when their guns have not been found to be at crime scenes ever, but just preemptively folds, that's a problem. That's a slippery slope you don't want to go down, because now the argument could always be, hey, your gun could be converted, you got to make changes. What are smaller companies going to do? Well, they take that R&D and they're like, can we bring this to the table, or are we going to be tied up in lawsuits? It makes them on edge when they don't have to be. And I think that's part of Everytown's strategy, that's just my opinion, is let's see how many of these companies will actually respond to this pressure. And if we can't get full-on bans, we threaten legal pressure or litigation, and then maybe get the changes that we want without ever really having to do anything or get any lawmakers involved. It's almost a way to say, hey, our bans aren't working in states where we want them to. They're not voting the right people in. When they do, they try to pass these things, they get held up in court. The NRA, the GOA, the FPC, they all kind of sue us. So let's see if we can just go straight to the manufacturer and make them make the changes we want. And if they get Ruger to do that, I think you set a dangerous precedent in the future. But here's the other thing. I think we all want to pay attention to what Ruger says, and I hope they are as bold as they've been in the past, and I think they will be. But the other thing, too, is the cat's out of the bag. With 3D printers, people are going to do this stuff. You cannot stop it. And I think Everytown probably knows that as well. So instead of going after the people committing the crimes, and let's just be honest, these people, most of them, and even looking at data, most of them are going to go out in their backyards, they're going to shoot some pumpkins or watermelons, have fun with it, and that's pretty much it. They don't want to go after those people. They want to go after the manufacturers themselves, because that's where they see the true evil lies. When they see one manufacturer backtracking and on their heels, this is kind of how they always work. One thing after another, and they look for the snowball effect. I say Ruger stops them in their tracks. Well, that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold 'em down.